In this video, I'm going to explain the MEV pipeline for Ethereum, specifically Mev-Boost, and the roles of searchers, builders, relays, and proposers in the block creation process. I'll explain this whole MEV pipeline here in a second, but first I want to think about what MEV is and where it comes from. So miners or block builders are able to extract value from a system like Ethereum, fundamentally because they have some power within that system, right? Namely, they have the power to decide the content of blocks. And this power can be divided into two main components. There's deciding which transactions are included or excluded from the block. Then there's deciding the specific relative ordering of those transactions inside the block. And as it turns out, each of these categories has its own associated MEV. And the topic of this video is primarily on the latter case. It's the value that can be extracted through that relative ordering, which is what allows for the front running and sandwiching, etc. But I want to talk briefly about the former case, the MEV associated with that inclusion-exclusion capability, because these two things are actually very closely related. One of the motivations behind EIP 1559, the current Ethereum fee system, was actually the mitigation and even elimination of some of that MEV which I mentioned, that transaction inclusion-exclusion MEV. And if you want the full explanation, watch the video that I did on this topic on EIP 1559. But I'll explain it just briefly here. So in the old Ethereum fee system, we had this first price auction mechanism for selling the resource which Ethereum sells. And the resource which Ethereum sells is block space, or more accurately, gas, right? Units of compute in the Ethereum world computer. And this resource was being sold in this using this simple mechanism, which I'm sure you're familiar with how it worked. It's like you kind of look around at the other transactions as a buyer of this resource. You look around at other transactions, see what they're offering, the fee per gas that they're offering, and you kind of like set your fee a little higher or something. It's like sort of blind, and it's just a simple bit of a guessing game. And this results in certain inefficiencies, one of which is this auction MEV, this extra value that is able to be extracted by the block builder. And to explain this a little more, I'll just explain this diagram really quickly. It's pretty simple. Basically, the width of this diagram is meant to represent the total gas available per block. Each of these rectangles is a transaction where each of them has a certain width, which is the gas that they're using in the block. And then their height is the fee per gas that they're paying. So the total area is the total amount of money that they're paying. And what the block builder does is they just take the tallest transactions pretty much and cram the block full of those to maximize the area, right? The income. And this works okay, but again, it results in some of these inefficiencies. And the first one here is this auction MEV. And long story short, this is just the result of that somewhat blind process of people bidding against each other, and they just tend to overpay, right? This guy paid quite a bit more than this guy, where he could have paid a little bit more and been just as well off, but you don't know that, so you get this steep curve. And the miners love this because they make that money, but it's not really good for users. So that's extracted value. The miners didn't do anything to deserve this. They don't need this income to be properly incentivized and to do their job, etc. In fact, they only need a very small amount of income per transaction to be adequately incentivized and all of that, right? Because they're getting income through issuance, like regular attestation income. That's a different topic, but like the income from the transactions is largely not really necessary. So anyway, the auction MEV is one of these ways they're extracting value. And the other is the base MEV. This is just the result of users bidding up this resource, this block space, and the miners are earning a bunch of that. They're earning that money, right? And if you just think about, there's times where Ethereum has very low fee, and therefore the fee revenue to miners is very low. And then there'll be a time of congestion where the fees are like 100x higher. So the miners are making way more income, but they're not actually doing any extra work. It's not harder in any sense for them to process the transactions when it's a time of high congestion. It's like, it's no different, really. So why should they be earning more money? So anyway, this income is just extra value they're extracting as well. So anyway, with 1559, both of these were solved or mitigated. The auction MEV was reduced greatly. It can't be entirely eliminated, but it can be reduced to a high degree. Basically, this curve is made flatter. And then this base MEV is burned. So we can't eliminate it, but we can burn it, which is better for ETH holders. And basically, the whole system is a lot more fair. And this MEV, these two categories, are largely reduced. The miners are no longer extracting that value. So this is a big improvement. And the reason I bring all that up is that this first category of that fundamental block building power was allowing for this value to be extracted, but we've upgraded the mechanisms surrounding this power. So there's now this different set of rules. There's this a base fee, which there's a base fee and a tip, and now the base fee is burned and the tip goes to the miners and blah, 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 blah. Watch the full video. But it's a big improvement and it mitigated that MEV. But the thing is, there's still this ability to decide the specific ordering of the transactions. And currently, Ethereum does not have any in-protocol system or set of mechanisms for like determining that specific ordering. The miners can kind of do whatever they want. They can order the transactions however they want. And users have no way of directly expressing and paying for their desire to be like, I really want to be ahead of this specific transaction. That's what matters to me and I'll pay you for it. There's no in-protocol way to do that. But of course, Ethereum is this adversarial, high-stakes financial environment, and the relative ordering matters a lot. It can be highly consequential. It can mean the difference between making a lot of money or losing a lot of money. So that ordering does matter. So what's happened is that an extra protocol, an out-of-protocol whole system has emerged to allow for various users to express and pay for their preference about that specific ordering, right? So that's what has happened with MEV Boost and this whole pipeline, which I'll explain now. Actually, one more thing I want to say is just that when you think of these two categories of MEV, the inclusion-exclusion MEV and the specific ordering MEV, they're different in that in the first case, miners are extracting value purely at the fee level. Basically, the users are just overpaying for their fee, and the miners benefit from that. In the second case, the real topic of this video, it's more complex. It's the actual activity happening in the realm of Ethereum in that financial world, and those actions are being extracted. There's the front running of trades, the back running, sandwiching, generalized front running, things I'll talk about later. So it's like a more sophisticated way of extracting value, where as the block builder, I have that privilege for deciding the order of transactions. So someone can come to me and say, look, the fee for this block is kind of irrelevant to me. I'll pay you that. But really, I want to be specifically ahead of this big swap so I can front run it. And I'll pay you 2 ETH for that privilege. And in the current Ethereum protocol, there's no way for them to express any of that in the protocol. So there was this whole black market basically for doing that. And this was happening for some time before this pipeline was developed. And the whole goal here with MEV Boost and with Flashbots is not to necessarily eliminate MEV. It's more like a step toward potentially eliminating or mitigating MEV, but it's a step. And the explicit goal is to illuminate, democratize, and distribute. So first, just illuminate the MEV activity, like allow us to see what is just happening. Then democratize access so that all block builders can participate in it. You don't have to be this sort of have relationships with certain individuals and being part of a certain club or whatever. And distribute, right? Distribute the MEV revenue in a fair way. So again, this is a step toward making this whole thing more fair. So on the right side of this diagram here, I've got the Ethereum blockchain progressing into the future as we go up the page. And each of these little squares is meant to be a slot. And in the new Ethereum beacon chain realm, a slot is just a place where a block can and probably will appear. But if the proposer misses their chance and they don't propose a block, a slot can be empty. But anyway, a slot is just a place where a block probably will appear. And we also have the notion of an epoch. An epoch is just a collection of 32 slots. And as an Ethereum validator, you find out ahead of time if you're going to be a block proposer for some slot. Basically, of the over 1 million validators, they are shuffled, or rather 32 of them are randomly selected out of that whole group to be the block proposers for the upcoming epoch, right? And if you are an Ethereum validator, you can just wait for your chance to be a block proposer and then build the block in the good old-fashioned way, which is you don't worry about any of this MEV stuff at all. What you do is you just build the block using your vanilla Ethereum client software, and it will build the block according to some simple rules which just optimize the fee, the basic fee revenue, and don't care about MEV, this specific ordering, MEV, front running, etc. It just builds a block, right? But as an Ethereum validator, you can also run some additional software which plugs you into this whole MEV pipeline. Because Ethereum validators run, primarily there's two softwares, there's two programs they run. There's the execution client, which is like Geth or something. And there's a consensus client, which runs the beacon chain, that's Prism, etc. There's also, as a validator, you need to run a validator instance for each 32 ETH, staked validator that you're running. And so those are the three things you actually have to run to just be a vanilla block builder and a tester and an Ethereum validator. But if you want to plug into this whole pipeline, you can also run Mev-Boost, which is this additional software, which will give you blocks that include this extra MEV stuff. Basically, that software will plug you into this whole pipeline. And then rather than building the blocks in the vanilla way, you get them through this whole process, which I'll explain now. So the way this pipeline works is that we have our Ethereum users who do whatever actions they want to in the system. They submit their transactions, and those transactions are generally public. They bounce around the Ethereum nodes through Infura or whatever, and they end up in this sort of public mempool. And then what happens is there's these entities called searchers, and these are bots. These are computers running some very carefully coded programs that run certain algorithms that look for opportunities to exploit these transactions, to make money from them, right? So this user does a buy for some token, Pepe, and then one of these searchers is going to find that transaction and try to exploit some value from it. So they're going to sandwich attack it. They are going to create this little bundle of transactions where they put a buy in front of the user's buy and a sell after that user's buy. So then they sandwich the buy, they front run it, then back run it. So they make some money in doing that. And then they include in this little bundle a bribe to the builder. So keep in mind, like, they're adding a couple transactions, 3 transactions to the user's transaction, but they need all this to be executed in a bundle. Like, they need the user's transaction to happen in this exact position in this little bundle. So the bundle specifies the exact ordering. Now, they don't necessarily care about other transactions that might happen in the block before or after this bundle, but they need this bundle to be executed in the order that it appears. And I mean, this attack is pretty self-explanatory, but this bribe to the builder is what I'll explain here. Basically, the searchers just look for these opportunities to exploit value to capture MEV. And they then send these little bundles to a block builder or multiple block builders. Now, the builders are the ones who actually construct complete blocks. So they'll collect these bundles and organize them into a block. And their goal is to maximize the overall revenue. So both the fee revenue, the normal regular fee revenue, and then also the MEV that's being captured. And the way they measure that, of course, is through these payments, these bribes to them as builders. So they're going to create a block which maximizes that value. And what they'll also typically do is they're going to, so they have all these bundles which have these bribes to them, right? Then there's probably a bunch of transactions that are just normal transactions. There's no bribes, but they fill the block, right? They try to fill the block with those to make some money there. And they'll typically also set their address as the Coinbase address, the fee recipient. So they'll receive all of those bribes, and then they'll also receive all of the fee revenue for the regular transactions, for all of the transactions. And so they're like taking all of the value, in a sense, for the transactions in the block. But then what they have to do is, because remember, these builders, they're just sort of random computers somewhere in the world running fast code and sophisticated, kind of optimization algorithms. But they're not block proposers. Like, they do not actually get to just, decide, well, I made a block, so I'm going to propose it. The Ethereum system decides who is the actual block proposer for any given slot. So these builders, they need to create a bribe to the actual proposer, right? So far, they're capturing all the value here, the fee revenue, these MEV bribes. They need to then bribe the actual block proposer a substantial amount, because if I, as a block proposer, accept this block and I propose it, I'm not the Coinbase address. I'm not getting any of the fee revenue. So that's, and also all of the MEV stuff was, those transactions are paying the builder. So this needs to be a significant bribe. So now I'll explain the process that occurs for this block to actually be sent to the proposer and so on. I should also mention that we have relays sitting as intermediaries between the builders and the validators. And these relays are essentially just trying to facilitate this communication of data between the builders and validators. And what they do is they'll connect to, any given relay will connect to many builders, and they'll collect these block headers along with the, note explaining or message saying how much the bribe is going to be to the eventual proposer. And the relay will then send the highest paying block header to the block proposer. And I'll explain that in a second. But these relays are, as far as I know, they don't make any money. They're just kind of a public good. And they're partly what they're doing is just making this information highly available, the information from the builders, rather than having the validators connect to like a whole bunch of different builders and sorting through the block headers, etc. You have the relays that kind of take care of that. Now, in this actual process, we have our builder construct a block, right, with a bribe to the proposer. Now, the reason they don't just send this block right to the proposer is because the proposer could steal from the block. If they just sent the block, the proposer could just take, and first of all, they could just take the bribe transaction and build their own block, throw that bribe transaction into that block, and now they're receiving that bribe money even though they haven't built the block they were told to build, right? Or propose the block that they were given. They could also they could unbundle these MEV bundles and steal that MEV for themselves, right? They could execute the front run or the back run or whatever from their own address, and they could take that money. So builder can't just give up the block. What they do instead is they send the block header, like I mentioned, to the relay. The relay sends it to the proposer, supposing it's the highest, most profitable block header. Then the block proposer is going to sign that header. They digitally sign it using their private key. It goes back to the builder, and the builder holds on to that signature, right? Now the builder will release the full block to the proposer, goes through the relay, back to the proposer, and now the proposer should just propose the block they were given. Because if they don't, if they try to change anything whatsoever in the block, even like just trying to steal a little bit of MEV or taking this bribe and putting it in a different block, like I said, if they make any change and propose that alternate block, then what's going to happen is they've got some different header that they've proposed, right? But they already signed this old header, this block header, and the builder is going to be very upset, and they're going to broadcast that signed header. And what's going to happen is the Ethereum, system will see a conflict. It's a slashable offense to sign two different block headers, different in any way. So if any of the contents are different, and you have two different headers, right? Any change to the contents, to the transactions at all, will change the header. And if you've signed two conflicting headers, it's a slashable event. So as a ETH validator, you stand to lose a bunch of your ETH, maybe all 32 ETH. I'm not actually sure exactly how much is lost. But that's the insurance that the builder has against you messing with their block and stealing that stuff. But that's basically the flow. That's how these two entities, the builders and validators who don't trust each other, that's how they're able to enter into this exchange. So that is basically how this whole process works. We have users who create transactions, searchers who look for ways to exploit these transactions, and they create these little bundles to do that. The builders assemble these bundles into full blocks, and they aim to maximize the value being extracted. Then they, as I said, they modify the block, or they build the block to include a bribe to the eventual proposer. They take the fee revenue for themselves, but they compensate the proposer for doing that in that bribe. And then we have the relays who facilitate this exchange, where the full block eventually is revealed. There's a commit and reveal process where eventually the full block is sent to the proposer, and the proposer proposes the block, and everybody is happy except for the Ethereum users who got front run. Now, I'll just briefly show this visualization here, and then we'll talk about trust. So this is from Mev-Boost.pics, and we can see that, first of all, there's a certain minority, 10% of block builders are building blocks the vanilla way using their Ethereum clients. The rest of the people, the rest of the validators are using this MEV pipeline. So it is the majority by quite a bit, and has been for some time. And then here is this visualization of the builders and then the relays, right? So we've got a lot of builders, right? Lots of entities that are building blocks. A relatively smaller number of relays. They're just, these guys. And they are connecting, ultimately, the builders to the proposers. And here, these groups are just showing, right, Lido has a large chunk of the block proposers. They're kind of managing a bunch of those validators, which is why it's showing these entities. What it's not showing is that there's a bunch of validators that are just independent, and they're not associated with any of these groups, right? But these are the proposers, right? And I'm reflecting that a bit on my diagram too. That's what this like blue blob is, it's showing that Coinbase in this case is running this set of validators, right? And Lido, etc. So there's certain ways in which some of the entities in this whole pipeline have to trust each other. This process is not entirely trustless yet. So for example, the searchers, they have to trust that the builders won't steal their MEV, right? They could just take these bundles and unbundle them, replace the front run, the back run, whatever, with their own, version of that coming from their address, and they could just steal the MEV and build their own block, right? Another is that the relays are trusted by the validators and the builders. So the validators have to trust that they'll provide a valid block header, because as a validator, you just get a block header and you don't actually know if that corresponds to a valid block, right? It could just be kind of gibberish. And then because you've signed that block header, you're kind of in trouble. Like you can't actually propose the block because the block is invalid if they give it to you. And you can't really propose a different block because you have a conflict, right? There's some nuance in there, but that's kind of the gist of it. There's also a risk that the relay will not actually send you the full block, right? Maybe you sign a valid block header, but you just never get the block. Well, now you're in the same situation. You're kind of in trouble. The validator also trusts the relay to report accurately the amount that the proposer is going to earn, that bribe amount, right? Because the proposer can't see it. The validator can't see it. So they have to, like the relay could actually kind of lie about that. And then the validator could be getting shortchanged and whatever. Yeah, there's a few of these elements of trust, and there are certain cases, which I'll link to, where some of this has been exploited. But in future iterations of this whole MEV thing, there's going to be some mitigations for this. So there's a certain amount of censorship in this process, which I'm sure you know, and that censorship is happening at the point of the relays, where there's this OFAC organization, Office of Foreign Assets Control, and it's a financial intelligence and enforcement agency of the US Treasury Department. And they've released this sanction list, which sanctions Tornado Cash and some associated addresses. So some of the relays are going to comply with that, and they're going to censor. But what that actually means, as I'm sure you know this, but what that actually means is that it's not that Ethereum itself will no longer process those transactions or something. It's that some of the relays will not forward blocks which contain those transactions. And what that really means, though, is that in general, it's just going to take a little bit longer for your transaction to be included if it's hitting Tornado Cash or whatever, right? Because we can see this pretty clearly here. Like there's a certain percentage of blocks which are complying with this OFAC sanction list, and it looks like it's like about half of the blocks are conforming to this, and then some 10% are not, and then the rest are not even using Mev-Boost, so presumably they're also accepting any transaction. They don't care about any sanction list. So what that actually means is just that it just means that there's a bit longer time to inclusion. If you're trying to do one of those transactions, which would be sanctioned, it's just going to take a little bit longer, right? So after 5 blocks, you have a 96% chance that your transaction will be included, right? After 10 blocks, it's like 99%. So this whole censorship thing really just has an effect of slightly slowing down the processing of certain transactions, which is not to say it's not a big deal. It is a big deal, but it's not catastrophic. So there's been a lot of research into how we can improve upon this whole situation and fix some of these problems, maybe eliminate MEV or burn it or whatever. And I'm just going to run through a few of these. Each of these topics is a huge topic, and if you want the complete explanation, go to the ETH research forums. I'll just briefly touch them here. So the first is enshrined proposer builder separation, and this whole system that we have here, it has proposer builder separation because the block proposer is not doing the block building, right? There's a separation between those two tasks. But the difference is here, this whole thing is existing outside of the protocol, outside of Ethereum. What ePBS would do would be to enshrine that proposer builder separation. So it's actually part of the protocol. Like the protocol would then recognize these different classes of entity, the block builders and the proposers, and they would have separate. We could then build incentive systems around each of them to make sure that things are functioning as we hope. And one of the benefits here would be the elimination of the relays, which would be good because the relays can censor. We have to trust them. Also, having this whole like system outside of Ethereum, this whole software project that's taking care of block building, you don't really want that to be outside of the protocol because it just creates this separate chunk of system that you're dependent on, but is not within the scope of the protocol. So another thing here is transaction inclusion lists, which would help with censorship. Basically, you could create a list of transactions which must be included in a given block. So then you just can't censor. If you don't include those transactions, the block is invalid, and that's it. Another thing here, which is very interesting, is MEV burn. So this would be an add-on for ePBS, which would allow us to burn some of the MEV. So some of the value that would be extracted by the validator, we actually just burn that. Then it's like a sort of dividend to all the ETH holders. And this would be good for ETH holders, right? It's also good because there's currently these huge spikes in MEV rewards. Usually the rewards are not super significant, like maybe 0.05 ETH or something. But sometimes you'll get these spikes of like 20 ETH, which is like winning the lottery for an ETH validator. And this is nice if you win the lottery, but it's not actually good to have this volatility of returns. You want smooth returns, so you incentivize the right number of validators, and the volatility doesn't really help anyone except the people who win out and win those big chunks. There's also, Vitalik mentioned that he thinks that the block construction endgame is maybe down to these two things here, FOSIL plus APS versus multi-proposer. And again, these are deep rabbit holes I'm not going to get into too much, but so FOSIL is the fork choice enforced inclusion lists, which is a version of the inclusion list I mentioned, and then a tester proposer separation. So you would have this enshrined recognition of these different groups of validators. And then we have multi-proposer, which you may have heard of Braid, which I've not done a lot of research into, but basically it's like you can have multiple chains that sort of run in parallel, each with their own proposers, like multiple proposers at once. And then Ethereum itself is the union, like block N for Ethereum is just the union of all of the blocks for that time, that slot, across these K different subchains. So you basically like split the block construction into chunks. It's like we're going to construct the Ethereum block where the first eighth of the block is constructed by this validator. The next eighth is constructed by this other validator. And this would be good for censorship resistance because even if half of those validators censor, every block will still tend to include transactions which would otherwise be censored, right? Another is encrypted mempools. Here we could encrypt the transactions so you can't actually see what transactions are doing. And they would only be, so then of course you can't really censor and you can't extract MEV either. You just see this encrypted data. You include it on a block and then it's decrypted after it's already included. So then you really can't front run, you can't do any of that stuff. There's also Suave, which is something that is being built by Flashbots, and this seems to me to be an extension and generalization of this whole block building pipeline that we have here. Except in Suave, we would have this whole independent network chain that is able to serve as the block building like assembly line for multiple different chains, right? So it could serve as the sequencing layer for Ethereum, Arbitrum, Optimism, Starkware, etc. So, yeah. Now, we'll see which of these things actually are implemented, pros and cons on all sides, but that's a summary of MEV. Thanks for watching. The next videos will be on Eigenlayer. I have another video on Eigenlayer coming. Bitcoin security, and then I have a super mega Ethereum explainer that I'm working on, as well as a bunch of other videos. I have one on free will that's ready to shoot. So yeah, thanks for watching, and see you next time. Peace.